Good morning. A little slow start on this Tuesday morning. The April 9th, 2024 work session of the Anne Arundel County Council is called to order. Please silence all electronic devices at this time. We're going to move right into legislation. We have bill number 21-24 up first. This is a executive branch bill. Mr. Hunt, you can assemble your team.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ethan Hunt for the administration. With me at the table, I have Asha Smith, the director of our Office of Equity and Human Rights, and Lori Klossmeyer from the Office of Law. Bill 2124 establishes a local civil rights law in Anne Arundel County. Currently, we're the only large county in Maryland without a local civil rights ordinance. This bill would rectify that shortcoming. It would expand our prohibitions in local law on housing, on discrimination in housing to discrimination in employment and public accommodation. It would give the Human Relations Commission the power to investigate complaints locally that are made for violations of the local civil rights law, and it would be enforceable with subpoena power that was just granted by the General Assembly a couple weeks ago. And with that, I will turn it over to Asha Smith, our Director of the Office of Equity and Human Rights, who can explain the bill in further detail.
Thank you so much and good morning. So as Ethan said, this is a local non-discrimination statute. It's relatively coextensive with the Maryland non-discrimination statute found in Title 20. We already, as you know, have a statute that protects against discrimination in housing. And the purpose of this bill is to, in the code, expand our protections to include private employment and to include public accommodations. This is relatively common. As Ethan mentioned, the neighboring jurisdictions have these. The truth is that local jurisdictions all throughout the country have these. Part of the importance of having a local civil rights statute is, first, it provides local residents with an efficient redress for harm. But in addition to that, it does make a statement. I think that the absence of a civil rights statute says something about the jurisdiction, and it may not be what we intend to say. It's important that the public, members of the public, know that civil rights are important in Anne Arundel County, and that we intend to uphold the laws in these areas. The beginning of the bill provides some pretty standard definitions. They're not different than the definitions that you'll find in the state statute. And as Ethan mentioned, the Human Relations Commission, like they do now with housing, would be authorized to investigate complaints and violations. They would, of course, rely on my office to do those investigations for them, and then present them with the findings that come from these investigations. I'm happy to take any questions.
Ms. Radovian.
Thank you. I was actually curious about the investigation process and how that works, because, you know, when we think of investigations, we're often thinking law enforcement. And so I'm curious, you know, this is obviously a different context. And by the way, I'm really glad to see this piece of legislation. So this is really just for my information and, you know, kind of finding out, does it have everything you need to, you know, to perform an effective and complete investigation?
At this juncture, it does have everything that we would need to perform an investigation. We already do investigations for internal complaints of employment discrimination, so where county employment is involved, and we do them for housing. So it would essentially follow the same process. We have an intake process, a complainant comes to us, or a complaint is referred to us. We do some fact finding, we interview witnesses, look at documentary evidence, come to a conclusion, and present those findings. Welcome.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So at the conclusion of the presentation, what then happens? Like, who would make the determination on what remediation is being implemented for that violation, if you will?
So it would depend on how the case is resolved. Typically, at the end, I will say first that most cases traditionally are resolved before they go to a hearing. During the process of investigation, if it appears that there's been a violation, parties generally have the opportunity to resolve and mediate complaints at any point before a hearing is held. The commission would be responsible for a hearing. So if there were a probable cause finding from the investigation process, the commission would conduct a hearing. All the facts would be presented, and they would make that ultimate determination. However, if the case is resolved pre-hearing, the parties sometimes can come to a resolution about what's appropriate for them, and that process would be facilitated by my office.
Okay. But like a judge can issue an order that gives either some redress to a person who's made a complaint or not, and maybe this with Office of Law.
Yeah, I'll defer to
Does the commission's final stance, is that the law then, or whatever the outcome of that? Because I know you provide the report and you present it, but what teeth? Like when I went through my appointment process back in 2012, they literally could have just voted forever because there was no mechanism that said, in 30 days, you either make a decision or it's going to go to the Central Committee, for example. In this case, what is the teeth, I guess, that?
So, sure, the Human Relations Commission actually sits as a hearing panel and issues an order.
Check.
And then that order is ultimately enforceable and appealable.
Got it.
So, yeah, so the Human Relations Commission acts as the judge, essentially.
I just want to make sure, because I know how it applies to the housing, but in this particular case, I was trying to see how you interpreted it as following that same
Yes.
sort of methodology. And then that individual could then parties could then either follow that order, or then one of them could go to take it to
I think they have
Circuit Court or
They
something?
have an opportunity to appeal it initially to the Board of Appeals and then to the Circuit Court.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Ms. Hummer?
So with this, I know it's modeled after the state. If someone filed a complaint under this in the county, would that preclude them from also filing a state or federal complaint as well?
So those agencies would have to make that determination. From our perspective, it's not an efficient use of our resources. I'll answer it in the reverse. If a person has a case pending before the state or a federal agency, we would decline that case because it's not an efficient use of our resources. If they choose, they can withdraw their complaint at the state or the federal government, and we could potentially take it. And generally, state and federal agencies work in the same way.
I would imagine that on the county level, hopefully we might be able to adjudicate things in a more timely manner than sometimes it takes at the state and definitely the federal level. So it might be a quicker resolution for someone at the county level.
That's the goal.
And may I ask another question?
Yes,
Madam Chair? Do you foresee your office needing additional staff under this bill for investigations, et cetera?
At this juncture, we're not sure what the appropriate staffing level would be. We do have a full-time investigator allocated to the office, and at least in the initial stages, that should be sufficient as we gauge the number of cases, what an average caseload would look like. However, we do have a plan long-term, provided that the legislation is enacted, that we would seek federal employment practice agency status, and then there's another status, FIP or FAP status, in housing. Basically, the federal government provides funds to local jurisdictions to take on these cases, and those funds can be used for staffing and outreach.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Ledbetter?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Oftentimes, when thinking about the employment line, oftentimes insurance companies for the employer have gotten involved in cases like this. How do you envision, how do you see that working with this process?
So the insurance companies are typically the way, are you talking about in terms of how settlements are funded or?
Or just also not litigate, but litigating the claims?
So I think it depends on who has jurisdiction over the claim, like where the claim is initially filed. If it's filed with our office, if it's filed with the agency, then the insurance company being our insurer, I just want to make sure that I understand your question.
The employers,
The private employers.
private employers.
Insurer.
Yes.
So that has not, in my experience, that's not typically how it works. It doesn't really get to that until we get to the settlement.
Okay.
Typically, a private employer has an investigator or an attorney that participates in the investigation process. This happens every day for them. It's usually somebody in their L&E division, or it can be in the general counsel's office. Sometimes it's someone in their human resources division that does that on their side. And so an insurer typically only gets involved, in my experience, when it comes to the point where a settlement is going to be paid out. And that's not always the result of these cases. Lori, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
Well, the only thing I was going to say is sometimes the insurance company provides the attorney for the employer, but whether or not that insurer gets involved, I don't think is really something that we would necessarily be involved in. That's just between the employer and their insurer generally. But I think it's true that any settlement some settlements may come out of an insurance by the employer.
Thank you. I was trying to see how that may or may not intersect. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Fiedler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Out of curiosity, in any given year, what is the number of cases that are handled without a hearing versus those that go to a hearing in the current structure?
So I can tell you that in terms of, well, first, we're not authorized really to take anything except cases right now against the county. I do those. And the commission takes cases in the housing arena. We have not thus far had a single case go to hearing in terms of housing cases. And part of that is a conscious decision to balance our workload and our staffing. As we have the resources to take more cases, we can take more cases. But previously, when we didn't have the staffing to do that, we would refer cases to MCCR, especially if they were particularly complex. I think that once the legislation, if the legislation is passed, we will have an idea within a few months of what the load might look like. But in general, most cases do not go to hearing. And I think any agency would tell you that. I feel pretty confident saying that. Most cases don't go to a hearing.
Okay, thank you for that. May I ask another question? And I apologize, I seem to be having some internet connectivity issues.
I think the county might be having that.
Oh, okay, because I have paper and I'm not used to using paper anymore.
That's okay.
So the subpoena portion of the legislation.
Sure.
Is there a portion that has some burden of proof language?
I don't recall that burden of proof specifically, but in these types of cases, if I understand what you're asking, these cases, the burden of proof is typically preponderance of the evidence. That's the standard. Is that what you're asking?
If there was a subpoena that was issued and the person who received the subpoena is not responding, my understanding is that you can have a burden of proof element to that to kind of incentivize or encourage, like, this is why we need this.
Lori?
Yeah, I'm not sure I totally understand that either. If you get a subpoena, you have to comply, and then there's certain things that happen if you don't comply. I'm not sure where a burden of proof comes in with respect to a subpoena.
If someone questions what the reasoning behind it, isn't there some responsibility to provide the reason substantiation almost, why you would need that information, why it would help the case?
Well, certainly getting the subpoena would, I mean, in order to get the subpoena issued, there would be some showing as to why the information is needed. But basically what happens is if you get a subpoena and you don't think you should have to comply with it, then there's a whole process of quashing that subpoena. So that's a whole another process of, and then that could end up, I guess, with some burden of proof to overcome a motion to quash the subpoena. But
Okay. So the burden of proof is on the front end, not
yeah,
the back
it's more
end.
on the front end, getting the
Okay.
subpoena for the proper defensible purpose. Yes.
Okay, and one more follow-up question. I know that there was some language at the very end of the bill about appeals, but I did not see, unless I missed it, now I'm kind of out of my element looking at paper, on the time for an appeal. Is it this standard 30 days or?
I believe it is 30 days. That part may not be actually be quoted in the bill because it might be existing language in the code, because this section is already in the code related to the housing part of it. So that time may not actually be in here, but it's usually 30 days.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see any other questions from my colleagues at this time. I wanted to ask the administration, and I guess this was directed to you, Asha, about preparing the commission, our volunteer commission, to serve in this capacity with training and other things. If you could give us a little update on how that's going to happen.
So we have a pending request before the Office of Law for training for commissioners. It's one of the things that we just believe is generally very important. The commissioners would be trained. The Office of Law has confirmed that they would support our efforts not just to prepare the commissioners, but also to help them to ensure that they're following appropriate protocols as they get cases. There are also additional commissioner trainings, because so many jurisdictions do this, that if the Office of Law were unable to provide it timely, there are commissioner trainings that are available from the state of Maryland and some affiliated agencies that would tell them about how to write reports, how to weigh evidence, all of those things. And so they would be trained before they adjudicated a case.
Sorry, you brought up a good topic. What is the typical time period for training, and is there any kind of, for lack of a better word, quiz or test at the very end?
I am not aware of a test that is given. I think that the time of the training depends on the availability of the commissioners, because they're volunteers. I can tell you that it would be several hours and that they would be left with some resources to help them as they listen to cases so that they can make sound decisions. And the Office of Law would be available for technical questions and technical support.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Would the commission have, during a hearing, would there be Office of Law presence, or would they rely on, or you would be present in that capacity?
I would not be acting as their attorney. The way that we have it set up now, because my office does the investigations, I would be there to present the report, the investigation report. I think that's still a pending question about the presence of Office of Law staff at a hearing. Lori?
I think we would probably be there available for at least procedural issues, as well as probably some legal research type issues.
Okay. I'm just thinking how the Board of Appeals operates. It's similar but different. So.
Right. Yeah.
Similar but different. That says a whole lot, doesn't it? All right, Ms. Ledbetter.
Thank you. This triggered a question, maybe obvious, but just to make sure. So the claimant, the person making the claim, they would, if they wanted to have legal representation, they would need to obtain their own. There's no resources coming from the county.
That's correct.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
Don't see any more lights regarding Bill 2124. Is there anything y'all want to, after hearing these questions, anything else you want to present, or we can move on to the next bill?
I think we can move on.
Yeah, I'm happy to move on.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
But by all means, if you have additional questions, please reach out to myself or Asha.
Okay,
Thanks
great.
very much.
Thank you. We're going to move on to Bill number 22-24, my favorite topic, the school utilization chart. This is a county executive bill. I see our school representatives here. We'll let you get seated and then we'll proceed. Mr. Hunt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bill 20, Ethan Hunt for the administration. With me at the table, I have Kyle Roof and Bill Heiser from the Board of Ed, Lynn Miller from the Office of Planning and Zoning, and Lori Klossmeyer from the Office of Law. The purpose of Bill 2224 is to approve the school utilization chart, which has been approved by the Planning and Zoning Officer based on 2025 projected enrollment. Happy to answer any questions.
Seeing no lights at this time, I'm going to ask a couple of questions which might spur other questions. So this is always a fun topic to talk about. We have 2 new schools opening and we're creating a new feeder fall 2024. That construction is well underway. I'm watching the high school come out of the ground. But the school utilization chart still does not reflect either the redistricting efforts that have passed or these new schools. I realize they're not technically open yet, and that's an issue for the school system regarding the way you characterize school utilization. But for the county and the Office of Planning and Zoning, that school's opening in the fall. Those students are going to be redistricted there, but until we pass another school utilization chart, it still shows the public that we are in a different place as far as utilization going forward. When the school system did the redistricting plan, you projected what, with each plan, the 2025 projected enrollment post redistricting. But this still has 2026 projected enrollment without those new schools or without that redistricting. Can we talk a little bit about that from the school system side and the use of numbers for y'all versus what we need them for in the development process?
Sure. Kyle Roof, Director of Facilities for Public Schools. The issue comes to the timeline of the approval of the redistricting. So redistricting was approved in November of 23. The EFMP was published in July 23. So the EFMP was published before redistricting boundaries were set and established, which made it difficult to project 26 enrollment numbers for the new schools that are going to be opening this fall, as well as any redistricting of the boundaries of the existing schools that are in place. So the 2026 projections in the school utilization chart before you are from the EFMP, Educational Facilities Master Plan, from July. Now, once the redistricting was established in November, our staff is now working on projections for the next master plan, which will be completed in the second board meeting in June for the Board of Education. And at that time, we would be able to provide planning and zoning an updated chart or data to reissue or bring back to your body for approval another school utilization chart reflective of redistricting and new projections.
I seem to recall when we were dealing with the timing of the school utilization chart and bringing it forward in March, which we did receive the school utilization chart by March 1st. It's not before the public until a little after that. But I understand we were concerned about the September 30 count of students in seats at September 30 and being able to calculate that forward by March. But now this chart takes us back to the EFMP that was issued in July. so there's just a disconnect. I understand, I'm just curious about the last time we were here talking about school utilization charts and what the public sees, because this is what the public sees as to how school capacity is currently. If I were a parent in Piney Orchard, it would still show that no redistricting plan in November had passed, and my children are still going to have 1,000 students at Piney Orchard Elementary. For us as a council and for the administration and the Office of Planning and Zoning to look ahead to the reasons we use this chart for development purposes, we're still seeing a lag in data. And I'm just curious how we can overcome that lag, not only with how I would have liked to seen, I would like to redo this whole thing, but we use the numbers for different purposes. And I personally think it's okay that we would have sort of different numbers. You use them, the school, CPS uses them for what you need to use them for, and the county uses them for what we need to use them for. And we're still not quite hitting the mark, especially when we're talking about a housing crisis and how we're going to allow development moving forward. It's still a little frustrating for me. Why couldn't we, there was a question coming, why couldn't the, what's the question? How can we reconcile the two different uses of these numbers and still make this chart reflect get more closer to real time, the reality on the ground? It might be more for the administration and planning and zoning than it is for the school system. Because this is the chart that the council passes for the county. While it obviously has something to do with your numbers, am I making any sense?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Smith.
I understand what she's talking about, because it's and just to lend credence to that sort of track that she's on. Today, if I bring my son to school late, I will get a text message. Like, hell, I get so many messages from the school. I'm grateful that whatever system you are using, because it is definitely real time. And I'm just confused on, and just would encourage the school system to be more agile, especially when it comes to this, because today you can tell me every single student that's not in school right now. I'm pretty sure that your system, if my son or daughter is 5 minutes late and I get a text message right away, pretty sure you can take a snapshot today and say, this is how many students are not in school. And if that system exists, we know what the seated capacity is on every facility. And what if the date was September, whenever you officially snapped that chalk, if you knew this was coming here, maybe within the last 30 days, take another snapshot, run it by the school board members, say, hey, this was within the last 30 days, and this is what we're going to do. Let's present this to them, because it's more real time instead of 7-8 months ago. I'm just sort of joining a chorus of folks who I think we have the process to be more agile and in real time with the data. I'm not sure why we somehow haven't just mastered the execution piece of it when it comes to us and then the utilization chart. That's all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I guess the code, is there something in the code that prevents us from departing from the EFMP to get to the school utilization chart before us today? I thought we were building this based on the September 30 counts. Now we're basing it on July EFMP, which takes us back 6 months. And then obviously redistricting, although it's going to affect, it affects this year's school utilization chart for 2024. We're going to go through redistricting for the southern part of the county next year as well, or it's underway right now. So we're going to be in this weird space for a little bit with this sort of two-phase whole county redistricting. It's really something I think we need to discuss with the Office of Planning and Zoning. What numbers, what can we utilize to create this for development purposes that it may be a departure from school system numbers?
Right. Councilwoman Pickard, I just want to refer back to the bill 5223 that passed last summer. But I do think that bill struck the language that said that the chart shall be based on enrollments in the most recent EFMP. And yes, it did. So the idea, so it doesn't have to be linked to the most recent EFMP. The idea is that the chart's supposed to be linked to the most current enrollment projections that we can obtain from the Board of Education. I think this year was just difficult because of the redistricting. The Board of Ed hasn't been able to complete their new projections that will go in this summer's EFMP and the new July FMP. They weren't able to have those ready in time to use for this chart. So that's why, as Mr. Roof was saying, it's our intention to bring, we wanted to get something in to meet the March criteria that's in the code, but it's our intention to bring another chart in the summer that will be based on the new enrollment projections that they complete by June, as Mr. Roof said. So I think this year has just been difficult because of the redistricting and also the new schools coming online. I think after this summer, once we have another updated chart going forward, it should be a little more straightforward.
I understand that, but if you were a parent maneuvering around the redistricting charts, there were projections based on each redistricting scenario. There were FY25 projections based on the scenario. So some work has been done by someone that are different than what we have before us.
So the enrollment projections in the redistricting were from 2031. The law stipulates that we needed to use 2026 as the target. Right now, I have projections for 2024, and our group is working on out-year projections. So we don't receive birth rate data from Maryland Department of Planning until around the end of March. We just received that. Then we have until the end of April to get that up to the state for their review and approval, and then hopefully we get a letter sometime in early May that says, yes, your out-year projections are within the realm of reason.
But the school system has, I mean, you're saying there's state law that says you need to be looking at FY26 3-year projections.
The 26 is in the APF. It's 3 years after the most recent official enrollment. So-
That's in the county code.
Correct.
We need to change that. Okay. Okay. Ms. Fiedler and then Ms. Radbian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Typically, when we've had the use chart, there's also a document that recognizes which schools have changed. I don't see that unless I'm missing that.
No, that's not included in the chart that's attached to Bill 2224.
Is it possible to get that document that we typically have? It's just easier to see which ones have changed from open to close or vice versa.
Sure. So you'd like to see those that have changed since the previous school chart that was adopted in Bill 9022?
Yes, I mean, we can each individually look that information up, but I always found that document to be very helpful at quick glance.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm not sure who can answer this question, probably a county person. But I was curious, obviously, our big focus is whether schools are open or closed for the purposes of development. And parents, as Councilmember Pickard suggested, would want to know for their child's schooling, is their school open or closed? Are there other purposes that we use the school utilization chart? I mean, does the county have any other purposes that we use it for?
Just speaking for planning and zoning, we use it for the adequate public facilities school test.
For what? Oh, for APF.
For APF,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's really the same thing as whether the school's open or closed, right? Okay. Is there any reason, I understand that, there's some state law that governs this, but is there any reason for the purposes of county planning and zoning, we couldn't have, I guess the one that you provided us has to be approved by the state for this purpose. I guess, okay. Now I'm talking myself in a circle. We couldn't do two separate charts. You're saying we could do an updated chart, but we'd still have to go through the process of the state approval if we somehow got an updated chart.
I think it's two separate things. So our enrollment projections are approved by IEC and Maryland Department of Planning. The most recent projections, which is required by the law, is I only have those from July, and that's for 26. The update to the chart could happen after I publish a new one that would give me new 26 numbers, and that would happen in July.
And then would we be allowed to, is there anything that would stop us? I guess you still have to go through the process, right, with those two state agencies?
Once the board approves it in July, as far as the updated projections, and I get the MDE approval, or MDP approval, then it's pretty much good. I can hand that data over to planning and zoning.
And then could we approve, I guess this is for Office of Law, is there any reason that we couldn't approve an updated chart in July?
I don't think you'd be restricted from approving an updated chart.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hummer.
So I fully understand the complications between various agencies and the state and everyone about getting this out there. I think a big thing that we're talking about is it does impact development, but it is also very much an optics PR thing for the public. Because when people see this chart and they see that Piney Orchard, for instance, in my district is, 70% over capacity, that's concerning. And it doesn't reflect that there is a new school opening and that that's going to be ending in a few months. We have approved, this council has approved, and the school board we've all worked this, hundreds of millions of dollars for school construction, which is fabulous. And we have these wonderful new facilities that are out there, and we need to be letting the public know that we have these new facilities and that we're not overcrowded because these new facilities are coming online. And I think that is a big concern that comes out with it when we get these numbers, because to the public who doesn't understand, we all know this, but to the average parent who's out there, they're going to see on the chart and say, what's going on? Do I need to homeschool my child because this school is overcrowded? Not realizing. And so I don't know what the solution is, because we are kind of tied with some of the state things and all the different data, but some way that we can put out there clearly to people that these aren't the real, for the fall of 2024, these are not the true enrollments that are going to happen at these schools, and that they're, to have that. And part of that is we need to toot our own horns. We need to be letting people know that this is the investment the county has committed to and is making, and it's going to make a big difference. And, we don't want cold, hard data that's not entirely complete to overshadow that in any way.
Ms. Ledbetter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the southern half of the county, that the redistricting, I know the process has begun, and are these the charts and the numbers that are being used to help formulate some of those decisions, or is there is there different data that is being used instead of or in conjunction with?
So we basically use the Educational Facilities Master Plan as the data that we're using for redistricting. Right now, we're in the process of procuring a consultant to help us with that phase 2. So we haven't started that yet. Once we have the new master plan established this summer, that data will be used to really help draw the lines for the new Southern.
Okay, so this chart, not necessarily.
This chart really doesn't play effect into the actual redistricting process.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Ms. Rodvian?
Thank you. Is there any reason that we couldn't put, a little asterisk with notes saying this, this data does not reflect the opening of West County Elementary School and Severn, am I getting the names right? I know they were announced and I haven't. West.
Two Rivers.
Oh, that's right. That's what we were calling it before. Two Rivers Elementary School and Severn Run High School. Is there any reason we couldn't put an asterisk on there, or like make an amendment to this bill to just make some notes to say, state law requires us to calculate it in a certain way using a certain data set. It does not reflect that. Yeah, I guess actually, and the North County redistricting. Would that, I don't know.
Yes, Ms. Rodford, we can add some notes, some footnotes to the school chart to address some of that.
Would that be a real amendment or a technical amendment or?
Probably
It's a real amendment. Basically, just have to substitute the chart, do a new chart that has those notes and then substitute it.
So with that, I would like to see a new chart after the new EFMP from the Office of Planning and Zoning. So when that happens, let's say by the time it's all said and done, it's a September introduction. Is that, we would then see the Severn Run feeder? Can I ask a question about the Severn Run feeder? Is the way students are going to be districted into the Severn Run High School, is it clean, like an entire elementary school? Or I think we're splitting students at elementary schools going different places.
It's clean on the elementary school level. At the middle school, we have split articulations.
Okay.
So Frank Hebron Harmon, Van Bachlen would go to, I believe, MacArthur Middle School.
And then
they would come to Severn Run. But it is, kids at elementary schools will transition together.
Okay. Oh, this chart's going to get so fun. I can't wait. I'm very excited. I don't think we're going to fix all the world's school utilization chart problems on this bill, but I'm ready to dig in a little better based on APF law, state law, what the school system uses numbers for, what we use numbers for. I mean, I realize the EFMP, the annual EFMP from the school system also directs us all towards the capital improvement program. So I understand all the different needs for good data. For me, for the Office of Planning and Zoning and why we utilize the data for APF, school test, it's really important to me that it's as timely as it can be. So figuring out how we navigate that, even in these murky redistricting waters, is important because we have a housing crisis. Does anybody else have any questions? I love some good school utilization conversations. I love it. All right, we can move on. Oh, I love it. I dream about it. We're going to move on to Bill 2324. Although Mr. Volke's not here, this is his bill. Would the administration like to speak on this bill? It is on the agenda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will say we do have some concerns about it. I know you have a letter from the Pension Oversight Commission as well. We're only aware of one individual that is particular bill would affect. So if Ann wants to add anything else.
Ann Podolsky. No, I don't have anything else to add, but happy to answer questions if there are any.
Does the council have any questions regarding Bill 2324? Thank you for coming down. You're dismissed. We'll move on to Bill 2424. Musical chairs for the school system. Come on up. This is an administration bill. Mr. Hunt, when you're ready, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bill 2424 is the third quarter fund transfer and supplementary appropriation bill. Just for the record, Ethan Hunt for the administration. With me at the table, I have Stephen Thoreau from the Budget Office, Lori Klossmeyer from the Office of Law, I believe Alex Bakke and Aaron Day from DPW, Chris Klein from Transportation, and Brian Ulrich from, Chris Klein from Detention, Brian Ulrich from Transportation. It's a whole long list here. So, as I said, it's to make a supplementary appropriation. I don't know if Stephen wants to add anything, but we're happy to answer any questions.
Stephen, did you want to? Come on, you came down, you put your jacket on.
Sure. So this third quarter bill does a lot of things. They're listed out in the fiscal note, so I'm happy to read through them if the council would like, or you could refer to the fiscal note as to what we are doing in the third quarter bill.
Ms. Fiedler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could we focus on the Department of Public Works for a moment and what is allocated in that section? Just for my colleagues, I did go out to the county facility in my district that had a very unfortunate catastrophic fire. And I know some of these appropriations will be of assistance there.
So I'll refer to Public Works, but in general, there are some snow expenses in here for the snowstorms we have. We don't appropriate that in DPW, so we're reconciling that. But yes, some of it also is for inventory, a replenishment of that building. But I'll defer to Public Works to answer that question if they can.
Good morning, Alex Bakke, DPW. Thank you, Councilwoman Fiedler, for your visit yesterday. Greatly appreciated by all the staff. There is a component to the supplemental to sort of address the immediate needs of our traffic maintenance facility. Given the recent fire, we have lost our ability to essentially provide public services around street signs and other traffic operations. So this provides at least an immediate bridge to reconstitute equipment, protective gear for our staff, plotters to make signs. We essentially have folks on portable chairs and tables in a garage at the moment. If you think of a fire, it takes you to ground zero. Your files, your phones, your computers, your pencils, everything is wiped clean. So that is what we have, and this funding is just particularly important to help us start to bring our team back up to be able to do what they do every day, what they take pride in, and so we appreciate the attention.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you for the opportunity. I really encourage any of my colleagues who are interested in seeing the temporary facilities to come over to District 5. I learned yesterday in my tour that staff arrived 7 a.m. the morning afterwards and were trying to figure out how to get up and running as quickly as possible. They weren't letting a minute pass by. So it was very impressive to see their dedication and constant commitment to their job and the citizens of the county. So thank you.
So I can't let it go by, Mr. Stansky. I need you to explain a little bit about why we're taking $5 million out of the contingency fund and handing it over to the Board of Ed for your health insurance.
No, I appreciate the opportunity.
Please elaborate for us.
For the record, Matt Stansky, Chief Financial Officer for Anne Arundel County Public Schools. Like the county, we have a self-insurance fund for healthcare that both has county or Board of Education contribution as well as employee contribution. Last fiscal year, We saw an abnormal growth in our claims, 12.8% increase over the prior year, which forced us to dip into our fund balance in the healthcare fund about roughly $11 million, leaving us with about $23 million. And so, as you may know, for fiscal 25, we have a pretty significant ask of the county, about $17 million to sort of shore up the healthcare fund. We're also reallocating $5 million of our own money in fiscal 25 to do that. But we're trying to also shore up fiscal 24. And so we, through your approval, we reallocated $7 million into the healthcare fund in our second quarter transfer. And speaking with the county budget office, they offered a help with mitigating fiscal 24, and so the offer was for $5 million, and obviously we greatly appreciate the support. That will help mitigate fiscal 25. We are also in negotiations with our unions to talk about plan design changes, things of that nature, to also look for some savings. So this is not, I would say, what we experienced back in fiscal 17 and fiscal 18, which was more of a crisis. This is more of a preventing the crisis. I will say our claims experience for fiscal 24 has come back to actually below what we're seeing nationally. We're roughly around 1% increase. So we just may have had a really kind of a blip year in fiscal 23, but we still at the moment do not have enough recurring revenue to meet the current obligations. And so I think this $5 million one-time increase will help us really mitigate that and get us to where we can get back to our long-term goal, which is enough recurring revenue getting into the fund to meet our obligations.
Thank you. Ms. Hummer.
Having been on the board during the previous crisis with the healthcare thing, I am very encouraged to hear you say that we are not in that place now, and that this is a one-time. And I'm glad to hear that the things look back to normal for 2024. We know that it only takes a couple of health crises for a couple of employees sometimes to really skyrocket things coming through. So.
And I did fail to mention that, while we have not sent over a fourth quarter transfer request, more than likely you will see additional Board of Education internal transfers to the healthcare fund to, again, help mitigate the situation.
So just want to see it back on solid footing, that we're well taken care of and not in crisis mode when it comes through there. Thank you.
Ms. Rodvian.
Thank you. You just in a tiny way touched on it. Are you able to say, will there be an increased ask, or will this have any impact on, teachers and all the other employee groups on their contributions?
That is subject to negotiations, and so we are working through that with our labor partners.
Any more questions on 24? All right, we'll move ahead. Bill 2524 is also an administration bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You have the floor.
Ethan Hunt for the administration. With me at the table is Andrew McCara from Inspection and Permits and Lori Klossmeyer from the Office of Law. Purpose of Bill 2524 is to make the necessary modifications to County Code Article 15, which is the Construction and Property Maintenance Codes, and the Construction Code Supplement of the County Code to update it to the most recent version of the National Electric Code, International Building Code, International Residential Code, International Energy Code, International Existing Building Codes, Fuel, Gas Code, Mechanical Code, Plumbing Code, and Swimming Pool and Spa Code. Needless to say, I do not have a lot of detailed knowledge about all of these codes, which is why Mr. McCara is here with me. We're happy to answer any questions if he wants to say anything. I know the IMP has been working on this since last summer, I believe, to update it.
Sure, Andrew McCara, Inspections and Permits. State law requires, state first adopts the new editions of the code, so it'd be the 2021 ICC codes and the 2020 electrical code. After the state adopts them, local jurisdictions have to adopt them within 12 months. So that's the main purpose of this legislation, is to update from the 2018 to 2021 codes, as well as some other amendments, changes, some cleaning up, some taking things out, some adding things to the code. So here to answer your questions.
Ms. Rodbian.
Thank you. I know we've discussed how the code impacts creation of ADUs, accessory dwelling units, and I'm curious, I feel like I'm so a fish out of water in this area, but I know he had talked about certain changes that had been adopted in other places that would help facilitate the creation of accessory dwelling units, and I'm wondering if any of these are among those. I feel like there was a Q involved.
Correct. So Appendix Q, which we have previously adopted, and with this legislation we will continue to adopt, that's an appendix in the International Residential Code. All appendixes are optional to adopt by local jurisdictions, and that's for tiny houses, so it would come into play with ADUs, 400 square feet or less. It kind of relaxes the requirements on some of it just because of the size and nature of the buildings, so we will be continuing to adopt that that appendix with this legislation.
Is that the same one that we've discussed in the meeting? So this is, but you said it's not a change.
Correct. Under the 2018 code, we've adopted Appendix Q, and with this we will continue to adopt it.
Okay. So it's been on the books?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I feel like maybe we were talking about a different one then. I feel like it was something related to Appendix Q.
It was I believe they said the state does not adopt it. So I guess we've always just kind of been ahead of the curve.
Okay. And we're allowed to do that?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Ms. Ledbetter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've had a lot of calls from constituents concerned about removable fences around pools. My understanding is that this addresses that situation.
This does. To explain that a little more, when you have a pool, the code says you have to put a fence around it or a automatic cover so people can't fall into your pool. But the code also allows, they call them mesh barriers, mesh fences, which would be temporary, removable. People put them up, we do our inspections, looks good, they take them down, neighbors complain, we come back out, they put them back up. So this legislation would strike that from the code to say, if you have a pool, put up a permanent fence, wood, chain link, your typical fence, or have that automatic cover to protect neighbors' kids from running into yards.
Wonderful. And thank you for clarifying that for the benefit of my colleagues. Appreciate it.
Ms. Fiedler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I always find it fascinating when this bill comes before the council. It makes me wonder how anything is ever built because there is so much information in here. But my question is regarding 10521 under permits. I've always wondered why I understand why a permit for fences on a corner lot would be required if the fence was going on the side of the residential dwelling unit that immediately abuts the street. But why a permit if it's going to the rear of the house or the opposite side from which the road intersection is located?
Great question. Again, to clarify, so that would be if you can't build a fence right on a corner, it has to be 25 feet back from the intersection, so cars coming can see traffic coming. I agree. I'm open if we can come up with some clarifying language. I believe it's just that way in the code, just as a blanket statement to help homeowners.
Yep.
So if you're on a corner, get a permit. Obviously, if it's in the backyard, no problem. Here's your permit.
Okay.
Just to kind of take that decision making away from them to say, well, am I impacting traffic or not? But again, open to clarifying language.
Well, I will be reaching out. Thank
Great.
you.
So we've, under the International Residential Code amendment, starting on page 12, there are charts and information related to Maryland Alternative R value. Similar tables are also in the International Energy Conservation Code amendments on page 16. Why are these new sections being added?
Great question. That's probably the most intimidating part of this legislation when you look at it. So when the ICC published their codes for our climate zone, it was kind of a roughly 20% increase in insulation that they were going to mandate. So the state MBOA, that's the Maryland Building Officials Association, looked at that and said, that's kind of a lot of insulation for our climate, and said, what else can we do? So they reached out to MBIA, NAHB, and then they hired Pacific Northwest National Laboratory to say, instead of having this 20% increase in insulation in your attic and your walls, what else can you do to make an equivalent energy efficient home? So that's this chart here. It's a lot. Some of it's more higher energy appliances, insulating your ductwork. So what this does, and again, this is in the state code. So we copied this from the state code. I didn't come up with this huge chart myself.
It's impressive. You could have taken credit for it.
Well,
yeah.
if I can, then I did.
Yeah, you should. You should.
So what this says is you can keep doing the insulation that we have been doing the past few years if you do X, Y, and Z, or sometimes just X. So you still put R49 in your attic instead of having to put R60 in your attic if you insulate your ductwork. So it's a lot cheaper, and it makes more logical sense to say you can't keep just throwing insulation and expect to be more energy efficient. We have better ways now. And as I said, it had the backing of MBIA. So it's a good, I believe, common sense way to, have an equivalent energy efficient way to build homes.
Thank you.
Of course.
Are there any other questions on Bill 25? Are we on 25, 24? So I just wanted to put this out there. As we are doing reforming housing policy in the county and diversifying dwelling types that may not exist in the code, I'm curious, as a follow-up to that, we should also be coming to you, maybe, to talk about what changes would be needed to the building codes to make sure that those kinds of dwelling types can actually be built.
Of course, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I read a lot about this, and Alaska has done an amazing job with some of these things. There are other states that are ahead of us. So when you're talking about a triplex or a quadruplex, rather than applying all the building codes to a 150 unit multifamily building, they're not the same as a single family, but they're not full multi. So what do we have to do within the building code to make it cost effective and so that those dwelling types can actually get built from the kinds of size of pipes and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, of course, always.
If I keep talking, I'm going to not sound as articulate, so I'm going to stop there. But I'm going to be coming to you probably in the fall.
All right, I'm always here.
It's very exciting. Did you hear that, Mr. Hunt?
Heard it.
Great.
Noted.
Moving on to our last bill of the day, 26-24, the emergency ordinance. This is technically Mr. Volke's bill. Do we want to, does everybody know what we're doing here? Do we have questions about it? Mr. Hunt, do you want to talk about 26-24?
Just happy to answer any questions you have, myself and Ms. Klossmeyer.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You could just add me as a co-sponsor because I know I had a similar bill that I withdrew just because it was the same thing and before this ordinance as well. So thank you.
This is an opportunity for my colleagues to talk a little bit about this bill. Ms. Fiedler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There has been some, I think, chatter out there about what this bill does and does not do. I responded to several folks, and I think first and foremost, this bill allows us to make amendments to comprehensive rezoning that retain the existing zoning without having to go through the sign process. I know Mr. Smith, I've heard stories of lots of legwork on his part to reach out to those property owners to say, hey, listen, I want you to retain your zoning. You may not even know about it. Maybe you have a letter and you just never opened it. But I need your approval to put the sign in your yard so you retain your zoning. And that's a lot. And I know I never intended when we passed the sign requirement legislation to make it more challenging to retain existing zoning. But it also, the bill reduces the sign requirement from 14 days to 7 days. This council has never been through the sign process. No other council has been. We, I think, tried to estimate a time that worked, that was doable for not only our staff, but gave opportunity for public knowledge of an amendment. But what we're finding is that is very challenging to work with. I don't know if anyone has, I have not personally been through it. I have only heard the challenges that Region 2 and Region 7 have faced. And as a result, we have had to hold hold amendments or just hold the bill in general. So if anyone can speak to those challenges and wants to now or in the future, that may be helpful. But I can see a scenario in Region 4 where we are, 2 council meetings before we can no longer amend the bill, realizing that there is an amendment that is needed, either retaining or changing. And just because we are out of the 14-day period, it's not even an option because we only have really 1 week in between meetings. So that's all I really have to say on that. And I appreciate Mr. Volke working very quickly to get this put together.
Thank you. I agree. I think these are needed changes. We knew, we didn't know what we didn't know when we passed Bill 6923. We've learned a lot in these first few months, and we should, both Ms. Rodvian and Mr. Smith and Ms. Hummer, whose districts have been most impacted by the first region plans. We're just learning. We're course correcting, and hopefully this is the right amount of days. The charter amendment that passed in 2018 just required notification. So I think we're just course correcting in how we presented 6923. So I think we're in good shape for this bill. It is an emergency ordinance. It requires a vote of 5, but it goes into effect as soon as the county executive signs it. So that's the story. Public conversation. Thank you, Ms. Fiedler. You were very articulate with that. Are we good on 26, 24? Okay. I believe that is our last. Is that our last? That's our last piece of legislation. Is there any other item council members would like to discuss at this time? Mr. Smith?
The internet is up, just.
Oh, the internet is up. Great.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
We have discussed, we are planning a legislative session of this council on May 1st at 7 p.m. Following our annual budget presentation. So that is a little bit of a difference, but I'm announcing it now. The agendas will be out. With that, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
The motion carries. The county council is adjourned until Monday, April 15th, 2024.